that. Okay, well, I think we're just about ready to start. Let me just fix that. Fabulous. Great. Well, thank you, Kathy, for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure to be here. I am not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I'm not a medieval historian. I'm a psychiatrist. Why has Kathy invited a psychiatrist to talk to all of you? You may be wondering. Well, I should say I started off as a psychiatrist, and then I went into pharmaceutical medicine and was doing clinical trial and clinical research for a long time. Then I discovered genealogy and became very interested. Then I discovered genetic genealogy and I became obsessed. So it's not so much a profession anymore. It's more like a disease for which there is no cure. But I'll be talking today about the Black Book, DNA and the O'Malleys of Limerick. And I'll be recording this as well for posterity, and if there's no problems for putting it up on my YouTube channel, which is called DNA and Family Tree Research, then you can view it at your leisure again and again and again. Medieval historian friends of mine assure me it's a great cure for insomnia. So the Black Book, DNA and the O'Malleys of Limerick. Well, there's always been a strong O'Malley presence in Limerick. And this is a map from 1901, and you can see this surname distribution of the O'Malleys in Limerick down there. In 1850s, the O'Malleys were also equally present in and around the Limerick area. But of course, the most famous ancestral homeland of the O'Malleys is in County Mayo, where they have a lovely motto, Terra Marique Potens, powerful by land and by sea. So they were great seafarers, and you can see on their crest there that they have a ship. They're also very famous for Gráinne Whale, Grace O'Malley, and there's a very long established genealogy for the O'Malleys in the ancient annals and the ancient genealogies. So the question is, how did the Limerick O'Malleys get to where they were? And are they related in any way to the O'Malleys of Mayo? So like I say, well-established pedigree, very famous for Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen. The ancient genealogies bring them back to the brother of Niall of the Nine Hostages, and that's important from a genetic point of view. And the big question is, are the Mayo O'Malleys connected to the Limerick O'Malleys, or was there a separate Limerick sept? Excuse me. So this is a question I put to the O'Malley clan rally in June of this year, where I was giving them an update on the O'Malley DNA project, which I'll talk about later on. And I simply asked people, how did the O'Malley name get into Limerick? And one theory was that, well, when Grace O'Malley was imprisoned in Limerick jail between 1577 and 1578, she had to be fed by her kinsmen because the prison food was awful. You know, so they would camp outside and they'd bring in nourishment for her every day. And perhaps one of the O'Malley's lads caught the eye of a Limerick lass, and the rest was history. And maybe that's how the O'Malleys of Limerick came into being. A second theory that was told to me was that after the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, the Great Retreat of O'Sullivan Bear did include some O'Malley soldiers. So could some of the soldiers on this retreat have left the main body of the retreaters and ended up in Limerick? And you can see that it's a little bit of a distance there between the line of the retreat and Limerick City, but it's possible. A third theory was that a bishop came down to Limerick from Mayo. He was appointed here in Mayo, in Limerick, and he loved the land so much, he sent for his followers and they all came down, and that's how the O'Malleys became established in Limerick. And of course, a fourth theory is that the O'Malleys, being powerful by land and sea, were powerful traders and merchants. They traded all down the west coast of Ireland, and possibly some merchant settled in Limerick, and that's how the O'Malleys got into Limerick. But the fifth theory is that the Limerick O'Malleys were an entirely separate clan. And we get some hint of this in Reverend Patrick Wolfe's 1923 publication, Irish Names and Surnames, Slinche Gaelog is Gaul, where he describes the O'Malley surname as being the name of a Connacht family who were chiefs of the two Ools, but he also describes them as the name of a Thomond family who are chiefs of Tualimni, a district in the neighbourhood of the city of Limerick. So we're left with the question, which theory is correct? And this is where the Black Book of Limerick and DNA can come to our rescue. So before we get to the Black Book, what I did was I looked through all of the records that we as genealogists would normally have access to. So the earliest church birth record on Roots Ireland was 1746. This is for an O'Malley in Limerick. The earliest marriage record was 1743. And the earliest death record was 1697. Now, there are no O'Malleys in Limerick in the Civil and Down surveys, or the 1604 depositions, or the Tudor fiance of the 1500s. But according to Begley, in 1148, the Cistercian monastery was founded in Monasterina by Turlough O'Brien, and in 1261, the abbot was Thomas O'Malley. So this is an early reference to an individual O'Malley in ancient texts. Also, Brian Hodkinson, who is with us today in the audience, of course, produced a list of people in medieval Limerick, and included in that list are a D. O'Malley from 1207, who was a canon of Limerick and was receiving a prebend, and that reference is the Black Book of Limerick, page 116. There's also John O'Malley, who in 1380 received a bequest in the will of Gillian Beaufort, and there's a Henry O'Mallow in 1341, who was a cottager in Athneasy. So among them, the earliest O'Malley individual is around about 1207. So then we turn to the Victorian scholars and antiquarians who might have been able to tell us something a little bit more about the O'Malley family or tribe in general. And people like John O'Donovan, John Ferrer, Maurice Lenihan, T.J. Westrop, whom you see there in a cave with an umbrella. I'm not sure why he's got the umbrella in the cave, but there you go. And of course there's James McCaffrey, who did a dissertation on the Black Book back in 1906, and it was published as a book in itself in 1907, and that is freely available online, and that was my main source of information. So Begley in 1906 says, Tualimni, about the noble Shannon, two chiefs are over it on one side, O'Calla, Keely, and O'Malley, the swift, beautiful ravens of the two Invers. So clearly Begley quotes a poem by O'Hearn, who died in 1420, which mentions the land of Tualimni and the O'Malleys being chiefs in that particular area. So the O'Malleys would have been a clan or a chieftainship within Limerick sometime before 1420, which is when O'Hearn died. Then in Westrop's Ancient Castles, we see him talking about Knocknagold or Crew Malley. The latter was the land of the Wee Malley tribe. And this, he varies between mentioning Knocknagold as the tribal lands and Ballyclough, which is a townland in the civil parish of Knocknagold, as the tribal lands. We then have Westrop's Antiquities, which are very interesting because there are three quotes here. The very top one, it says, the Tualimni lay along the Limnoch estuary as far as the Meg, and gave their name to the city of Limerick. The chief sept were the O'Gunnings. And then the next one down, he says, there were several petty tribes, usually only remembered for having given their names to various lands, and all of very uncertain affinity. The chief of these were the Malley of Crewy Malley. And then the last one there at the bottom, they were rather families than septs. So we get this very interesting picture of the O'Malleys as being one of a multitude of rather petty tribes, rather families than septs, in and around Tualimni, which roughly corresponds, as we will see, with today's modern barony of Pobble Bryan. Now, there's one other quote I want to draw attention to, and it says, "A colony of the Burkes gave their name to Clan William." Now, the Burkes, of course, were well known up in Mayo, and it's possible, again, another theory, that the O'Malleys arrived with the Burkes. So now we've got 6 theories to contend with. So to Limni, here you see, bounded by the estuary of the Shannon, the Limnock, on the north, and the estuary of the Meg on the west. It roughly correlates with the barony of Pubblebrine today, and you can see the barony of Clan William is to the east. Now, there's multiple petty tribes in this particular area. The O'Malley land was either in Knocknagowl, which was just over 2,000 acres, or Ballyclough, which was within Knocknagowl, which has an acreage of 363. And that will become important when we come to the Black Book. They lay within the south liberties of Limerick, as you see from this map here of the Down survey of 1654 to 56, and you can just make out Ballycloughy down here. So the name Ballyclough was also known as Ballinaclough and Ballycloughy and various other variations, and you can see the liberties of Limerick would have extended down to this area here, and again that becomes important when we come to the Black Book. So what was the Black Book? Well, it was a 76-page manuscript on vellum and parchment. It was a compilation of various medieval documents composed of grants, an inquiry into property held by the church, and ecclesiastical tax returns. And these date from 1194 to the 1420s, plus a few later editions in the early 1600s. Now, James McCaffrey, who was Professor of Ecclesiastical History in Maynooth, published his book on the Black Book of Limerick in 1907. The introduction consisted of 14 chapters in Roman numerals and followed by a transcription in Latin with no translation written in Arabic numerals. So when I went into the British Library and was looking for this wonderful Latin translated into English, I was disappointed, and now I have 70 photographs of that particular portion of the book that remain to be translated by me or somebody with a great deal more knowledge. But with my schoolboy Latin, it seems I can just about make out what's being said. And then, of course, there's an expanded index to accompany McCaffrey's book, which was published by Brian Hodkinson in 2009, or thereabouts. Now, the Black Book is very, very interesting, because when you follow the O'Malley land in the Black Book, it's like a 3-card trick. You have to keep your eye on the land. And the key players are the king, or actually both kings, there's 2 kings, the bishop, the citizens of Limerick, and the native Irish, which included the O'Malleys. So keep your eye on the cards. First of all, this is the apparent timeline, and here you see at the very, very top right an extract from McCaffrey's book written in Latin, and I found a translation of this by Brennan in 1840, yes. And the apparent timeline is 1194, King Donald O'Brien, the last of the Irish kings, grants land in Tualimni to Brictius, Bishop of Limerick, including O'Malley land, which is described as Emalin within the text. Brian Hodkinson was very kind to point out to me that this probably was granted a lot earlier, possibly 1178 to 1185, according to Flanagan in the Irish Royal Charters. So in 1194, King Donald dies, the Normans regain control. 1197, King Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, grants the first charter to Limerick, and in 1199, King John becomes king and builds the castle in 1211. So the next thing that happens is the bishop transfers the land, or the land is transferred from the bishop to the citizens of Limerick around about 1210, 1213, where 40 carucates of land are granted to the citizens of Limerick, and this includes 10 carucates of land in O'Mail, part of Knocknagowl, formerly granted to Edmund, Bishop of Limerick. Now, this later became part of the liberties of Limerick, 16 on the north, 24 on the south, And a carucate of land is roughly equivalent to a plough land, and I think it's roughly equivalent to a liberate, and I'm not sure if that's where the liberties comes from, but I am going to come back to you as medieval scholars to allow an area, wisdom from an area of high concentration to flow into an area of low concentration. A carucate would be today worth about 120 acres. So if the O'Malley land was 10 carucates, that would be about 1,200 acres, which would be, as we shall see, larger than the acreage in Ballyclough, which was 363, but not as much as the acreage of Knocknagowl, which was just over 2,000. So then the land was transferred from the citizens back to the bishop. In 1215, King John grants an annuity to Edmund, Bishop of Limerick, but in 1216 that annuity was falling into arrears, so instead he gives 10 liberates of land instead, and these were in O'Malley country and held by the citizens of Limerick. So now the land is going back to the bishop from where it came. Then the bishop gives it away. In 1230, ex-Bishop Edmund, and I'm not sure how you become an ex-bishop, but I'd be interested in hearing your theories. He grants these 10 carucates of lands of O'Mail to John de St. John, who later became the Bishop of Ferns. And in 1274, the 40 carucates held by the citizens, so now it's gone back to the citizens, had been encroached upon by the Irish, who took away all the fruits and uses of it, and they were no longer able to pay the rent. So did this include the lands of O'Mail? Did a citizen now hold this land? Does anyone know what's going on? So it is like a wonderful three-card trick, and you see the native Irish being kind of pawns in this jostling for land and power. And then finally there was a change in ownership. In 1336 it went to Thomas de Vale, in 1615 it was held by Chris Arthur, and in 1655 it was held by John Arthur. But whatever the way the land was moved around, it is very, very clear that the O'Malleys were well established in Limerick by the 1100s. And that has implications for our theories. It means that the idea that they came down with Grace O'Malley is probably not that likely. We can't rule it out completely, which is why I've put a dotted line through a lot of these theories. We can't discount any of these theories absolutely. There could be a mixture of all these theories in operation. The idea that the O'Malleys came in 1602 as part of the retreat of O'Sullivan Bear, probably not that likely. And the theory that a bishop had been appointed to Limerick and then brought his kinsmen down, probably not so likely either. The theory number 6, that they were part of the Burke colony, that is probably not likely because the Burkes came down after 1200, and we know the O'Malleys were well established by the 1100s, so we can discount that as well. So we're left with two leading theories. The O'Malleys were seafarers, and that way they came down from Mayo to Limerick, or alternatively they were an entirely separate clan, and that's where the DNA comes in. Because it helps us to distinguish between these competing theories to give us a favourite. So Y-DNA is the one test that we'll use in this particular instance, and it is available from Family Tree DNA. There's a lot of other commercial companies out there, but they mainly do autosomal DNA, which looks at all of your DNA. We're only interested in the Y-DNA, and the Y chromosome passes from father to son, so the Y-DNA is very useful for going back along the father line, more than 200,000 years. So this is useful for deep ancestry and human migrations. It follows surnames back to their origin, about 900 AD in Ireland or thereabouts. It can connect you with same surname cousins. It's very useful, therefore, for surname projects because the surname follows back along the direct male line, as does the Y-DNA. And it's also very useful for clan studies, and more than 700,000 Y-DNA tests have been done. There's two types of Y-DNA marker, STRs and SNPs. That's just to let you know that we used two different types. Running very quickly through this then, These have allowed us to build the tree of mankind, and there's about 20 major branches. This one down here, branch R, is the one that most Irish people will sit on. Back in 2002, we only had 16 sub-branches on branch R, but now, if we come forward into the present, we have practically a branch for a huge number of different surnames in Ireland. So there's probably more than 20,000 sub-branches of this haplogroup, and that just is an indication of how young this science is. So in Ireland, the most common haplogroups would be haplogroup I1 and I2, 6% each, but OR1b is 81%, OR1a is only 2.5%. So OR1b is the major one. And like I say, very useful for studying human migration. Here you can see the map of people leaving Africa to about 60,000 years ago and going all the way around the world. And OR1b is one of the major ones that comes in to Europe, and Ireland is particularly heavily populated with this particular DNA signature. Here are the major ones: I1, I2, and OR1a and OR1b. You can see that Ireland is very heavily populated with OR1b. This is just like a heat map or a frequency distribution. In Norway, it's most commonly I1, and there's quite a big population of OR1a. And for comparison, these are the most common Y-DNA signatures in Norway. And you can see that I1 is 31%, whereas only 6% in Ireland, and OR1b is only 32% in Norway, but 81% in Ireland. But if you have this signature, it could be either or, but it's going to lean more towards one than the other. If you really want to find out if you have Viking DNA, I highly recommend Peter Sholin's lecture from Genetic Genealogy Ireland back in 2016 called Viking DNA, Do You Have Some? And Where Did It Come From? And that has been viewed over 29,000 times. It's the most popular video that we have up on that channel. So that brings us to the O'Malley DNA project, and we have a website, a Facebook group, and a YouTube channel. And recruitment has increased steadily over the years since 2005. We had the Clan Rally in 2017. There was a big boost in recruitment. And altogether now we have, well, it's over 125 members at this point in time. It's more like 140. And there are various members of the project have done a variety of different Y-DNA tests, testing both their STR and SNP signatures. And this is what the project results page looks like. Here are the O'Malleys of Limerick, for example. If we put up their Y-DNAs stacked on top of each other and aligned to show the various markers, you can see that there's a few mutations indicated by these coloured squares, but the vast majority of the markers are an exact match to everybody else. And that's why you can group them together, because they're genetically quite close. If I compare the ungrouped section, you can see that people in the ungrouped section have a huge number of mutations. They're not genetically related to each other. They're not genetically related to anybody else in the project. And back to the group 2 O'Malleys again, you can see that there is a nice, relatively tight connection there between them. And this is a summary of the project so far. The good news is all the O'Malleys are related to each other. So, for example, the O'Malleys in Group 1 are related to the O'Malleys of Group 5 by a common ancestor about 45,000 years ago. So they're related, Jim, but not as we know it. In terms of the start of surnames, which is down here, it's really this period that we're interested in from a genealogical point of view, and maybe the 1,000 years before that from a clan point of view. One of the things that stands out is that the Mayo O'Malleys seem to be falling into Group 3A. There's about 22 there in Group 3A. There's 4, 1, 4, 2, and 3 in the other groups below M222, which is associated with Niall of the 9 hostages. Now, that's not to say that the Mayo O'Malleys are descended from Niall of the 9 hostages. They are genetically related to Niall of the 9 hostages or his clan. And that would certainly be in keeping with the ancient annals, which report that the O'Malleys of Mayo are descended from Brian, brother of Niall of the 9 hostages. The Limerick O'Malleys seem to be gathering in group 2. There's 10 of them there. There's another 2 in another possible Limerick group here, and they go back to L226, and this marker is associated with Brian Boru. Again, not descended from Brian Boru, but they would be related to Brian Boru. And we also have to remember that a variety of invasions and natural disasters occurred during this period of time from when Ireland first got its settlers to when the O'Malleys settled in Limerick. And there's a huge number of events that could have perturbed our interpretation of the DNA, such as the Black Death, killing 50% of the population of Europe. That could have wiped out 50% of any descendant lines. Similarly, Cromwell's invasion saw roughly a 40% drop in the population of Ireland. Again, it's very difficult to be certain of the actual figures. And then, of course, the Great Famine, which reduced the population of Ireland by 25%, 12.5% from deaths and 12.5% from emigration. So all of these factors could really have disturbed the transmission of DNA. And for those of you who are interested in the Dalcassian tribe, Dennis O'Brien, who is the project administrator of the O'Brien DNA project, has produced this fabulous chart showing the descendants of the O'Briens, including Sir Conor O'Brien himself. But coming back to that topic of perturbation, there are many reasons why the DNA did not pass down to living descendants, one of them being allegiance to the lord of the Tua, the clan chief. So servants, soldiers, vassals and tenants and slaves would change their surnames to show allegiance to their tribe. And this is very nicely indicated in Anne Chambers' book on Grace O'Malley, where she says, Grace eventually became a matriarch, not merely of her own followers and extended family, but of neighbouring clansmen whose chieftains had either died in the numerous conflicts of the period, or who had abandoned their obligations to protect their dependent followers. So what we're seeing here is a whole group of foreign people, foreign to the Mayo O'Malleys, coming in, and to show their allegiance, it's quite easy to imagine that they would have changed their surnames. But of course, they're not bringing in O'Malley Y-DNA, they're bringing in foreign Y-DNA, and that foreign Y-DNA is now becoming associated with the O'Malley name. So descendants of those O'Malleys will not have the original O'Malley Y-DNA, but foreign Y-DNA that came in around about 500 years ago. There's other reasons as well. Adoption, fostering, guardianship can cause surname or DNA switches. A young widow remarries. It can be a legal condition of marriage. Taking the wife's name upon marriage, like Oliver Cromwell did. He was really Oliver Williams. Customary coupling with powerful people was an unusual custom. And then we had this naming custom where the wife on her deathbed would say, darling, you know our son. Of course I do. Well, he's not yours. He's somebody else's. And then there's, of course, infidelity and illegitimacy under Brehon law were completely different concepts to what we have today. And then, of course, later on, there's anglicisation of surnames. So there's a whole host of reasons for why there's a discontinuity between the surname and the DNA, and so you can't be guaranteed that the person who originated the surname, that Y-DNA that he had was passed along associated with the same surname up to the present day. There's probably a 50% chance that all of us have a break like this somewhere in our direct male line, and our surname may go back all the way to the originator, but our DNA, our Y-DNA, does not. So, and that's a problem, because when you look at the time to most recent common ancestor, with the Mayo O'Malleys, we can only go back as far as 1400. So there's 400 years missing before 1000 AD, which is roughly when surnames would have become popular. And with the Limerick O'Malleys, we can only go back to 1700. So there's 700 years of doubt about whether it continues back along that way. maybe group 4 O'Malley's are a contender to the throne of the Limerick O'Malleys. We have to wait and see by having more people join the project. So last slide. Where are we now? Which of our theories is winning this race as the contender for the Limerick O'Malleys? Well, I think we can put Grace O'Malley, the O'Sullivan Bear Retreat, and the Bishop as runners-up. We can put Theory 6, the Burke Colony, as number 3. Theory 4, they were seafarers. That would be still feasible were it not for the DNA showing that the Limerick O'Malleys are a distinct genetic branch to the Mayo O'Malleys, according to the current evidence. So I'd say theory number 5, that they were a separate clan, is currently leading the way in terms of the horse that's going to pass the post. So the Black Book paints a fascinating picture of power play in the medieval Limerick. It confirms that the O'Malleys were well established in Limerick by the late 1100s. DNA shows that the Limerick and Mayo O'Malleys are genetically distinct. The group 2 O'Malleys are probably descended from the original Limerick tribe, but there may be other contenders that will emerge over the course of time. And anyone can use the Black Book. It's certainly been a very useful aid to my genealogical research, and I think any genealogist should ask the question, is your surname in the Black Book? A comprehensive English translation would be very helpful, and I know Kathy is going to talk to us more about that. And public accessibility by the works of McCaffrey and Brian Hodkinson's excellent expanded index will certainly encourage more academic research and citizen science like you've seen today. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Okay, same rules apply. Because of time constraints, we're limited to 5 minutes, unfortunately. But, yes, Lenore.
Right. Can we go back to your slide? It's the second to the last. No, before the one before them. No, that one. Yeah. I have two things. One first, you have the Mayo clan there. There are 22 individuals.
That's right. Yes.
And the Limerick one, there are
10 individuals just here.
So that's not a huge statistical sample. But it's
No.
Okay, and now when you go up from, say, the Mayo one,
Okay.
yeah, you go up and you have those, those two little flags in yellow and stuff. What is that? These
are DNA markers. So people within this group have tested for a DNA marker which correlates with which arose approximately 600 years ago. The one above it approximately 700 years ago.
Arose 600 years ago. How are you coming by that?
Because what we can do is, first of all, each of these SNPs represents a block of SNPs, okay? And we know from doing this SNP research that each SNP is equivalent to approximately 84 years of time. So you basically look at the number of SNPs and you count how many there are multiplied by 84, and you've got a very, very rough idea of when that SNP probably was formed. That SNP is just a mutation in the DNA. Now, these are very crude approximations, and you're looking at maybe 200 years on either side of this estimate. And of course, as you come down in time, you've got far fewer data points from which to actually make these calculations. So the range of possibilities around your estimate get larger and larger. So coming up to the present day, you're going to have maybe 300 years on either side of the SNP.
It is a very long and complicated procedure, and it would be a whole lot.
Sure.
I'm going to shut the conversation down there because we could be very much sidelined on that one.
Could I connect the two papers, and that relates to how far back can you take, I assume the O'Malleys are Dalcashian, but I don't know. How far can the DNA people track back a genetic, a Dalcashian core? You know, and Brian Baru is,
sure,
I assume, late rather than early.
Sure, and in actual fact, Dennis O'Brien is the person that's actually done statistically significant. Since then, they've done a huge number, many more people have tested. They've tested Sir Conor O'Brien, which has 30 generation. I can't focus from here, so it might be up there. there's 30 generations of his pedigree back to Brian Boru. He's tested the same SNP marker as everybody else in the O'Brien project. So basically, I would refer you to Dennis Wright's paper and also to read about the O'Brien DNA project on that particular website.
Okay, I'm Margaret.
You were asking about how did somebody become a former bishop.
Yes.
That document was an inspeximus, which is a reissuing of an earlier charter. So they're describing the person who formerly was Bishop of Limerick,
but is not dead.
So he's right.
At the time that he issued the charter, but he's now dead.
Grant. Thanks for that.
And our very last question, apologies to everybody.
You did mention the term polygyny, that is to say the widespread practice among the upper levels of our society of having an official wife and then one or more unofficial wives. Presumably that's a major factor in DNA displacement.
Not for Y DNA, because the Y DNA comes from father to son.
Right, okay.
So you can have as many wives or mistresses as you like. Your Y DNA will go down to all of the children of all of the mistresses. It would be a major consideration if we were to look at the mother line, and that's mitochondrial DNA, and you would see major disruption in that transmission from polygyny.
But it should have an impact on the calculations about date, but that's for a discussion in the pub.
Great.
And I'm going to close you down there.
Fine.
I'm terribly sorry.